And then I will, just to make sure, look at, that's what it looks like. So that's where they'll be, right?
Good.
All right, very good. So you're doing it on that too?
Yeah.
Good.
That's right.
It's like we got a packed house tonight. Don't say that.
Don't say that.
Sorry, there's literally no one in here right now.
Undergroup of 25.
Really good holographic technology. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you, those of you that are joining us in the flesh, and to you that are in the flesh but a distance away, thank you as well for joining us. Before I begin, I want to go to the Lord in prayer and ask for His blessing on our evening. So let's pray. God above, we thank you for your faithfulness in all times, your continual gifts of mercy and grace. Even when we don't understand the manner in which you dispense those things, we recognize that you are faithful in doing so. Lord, we thank you for these two girls who have put in much time, and we ask that you would give them words seasoned with grace and allow them to speak to the effect of truth, goodness, and beauty in the things they've studied, allow them to articulate well, and allow this evening to glorify you as we seek to honor the things that are good. We ask these things in the name of your Son. Amen. For those of you that are unfamiliar with me, my name is Isaac Hallgrimson, and I teach rhetoric at Geneva Academy. And in particular, I've been teaching over the past year these two ladies in Rhetoric 4, which is our Capstone Program. The Capstone Program is essentially supposed to be the culmination of the classical Christian education, where our seniors are asked to engage with a real topic in the world that needs to be addressed because of its disjunction with either the classical model or the Christian models that we exemplify here at the school. And so over the course of half a year, they have to come up with a thesis, which is an argument that they will present with proofs to back their reasoning. They have to come up with an antithesis where they try to take the opposing side of that argument and argue from that angle in order to gather a greater understanding. Then they have to turn that into something for the speech meet, which they gave that presentation in March. And then they have to actually get down to the real work, which is gathering resources, drafting a rough draft, running it by their mentors, ultimately refining it, submitting it to their teachers, and at last, bringing it before a panel of our judges to engage them in a real world discourse of ideas. So that is the capstone in a nutshell. The events for the evening, we will have Caitlin come up and go first, and she will read off a condensed version of her capstone for the sake of the audience, and then she will open it up to questions from our judges for about 20 minutes. And then once they're satisfied with her responses, we'll take a quick break, and then we'll go to Heidi. So before I go any further, I'd like to first of all thank our judges, Jerry Duncan and Carol Newell, for joining us and putting in all the energy that is thoroughly examining these papers and going through this trial with us. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. And for those of you unfamiliar with Jerry Duncan and Carol Newell, I would ask, would you mind telling us a little bit about yourselves?
No, don't stand.
Please.
Stand. My name is Carol Newell. I live here in Roseburg. We've been here 35 years, graduated from Oregon State, graduate degree, master's degree in education. I taught at Oakland High School, taught business, and at UCC. And stayed home with our two boys after they were in grade school, and saw them through school and off to college, and now I just kind of do things like this that I love doing and working with kids. I volunteer locally occasionally at UCC and really enjoy that. So
Well,
I
thank you.
guess that's it.
You're good.
I can hang out some stuff.
You're free.
And congratulations, girls. You did a beautiful job.
Thank you. Jerry?
I'm Jerry Duncan. I've lived in Roseburg. Met my wife Sherry probably a month after I got here. We got married less than a year after I met her, and we've been here 45 years, and so we're our 45th anniversary of wedding anniversary. We're raised both of girls here at Roseburg High, and we graduated from Roseburg. And despite all the always stay friends here, woohoo! They're going to both that say they both down in California. Feel very proud. Both Gustav has a master's degree. Charity has got a doctorate too. So anyway, I feel like this is an honor. One of the things we might be having interest in is Christian education, Christian college education. To me, it's very, very personal. I graduated from college. Both did, and I probably value to us. And that's it.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. All right, well, now to the reason why Caitlin and Heidi are panicking right now. Caitlin, would you please come on up and defend your capstone?
Hi, my name is Caitlin Riley, and my thesis is that classical Christian artistic study is essential to education. And I will start by reading my condensed version of my capstone. Quote, everybody comes from the Creator trailing wisps of glory. We come from the Creator with creativity. I think that each one of us is born with creativity, end quote. We are all born into this world with some form of creativity, yet we still tend to ignore creativity in the form of the arts. We don't give the arts the recognition and praise that they deserve. Instead, we throw them out to the side. And when we do so, we are throwing something away that our very own Creator gave to each one of us. This can especially be seen within the education system. Over the last few decades, people have lost the true meaning of art and how it can benefit us. It has been viewed as an unhelpful subject in education. My thesis will aim to illustrate the exact opposite. I will argue that a classical Christian artistic education, such as the study of music in art history, is the only true form of its instruction. All other forms of artistic education fail to show its importance to not only to Christians, but also to those who aren't Christians. Art education is a fundamental truth that needs to be taught and examined as much as history or language or geometry. And I want to stress the importance of this for Christians. Whenever we study the arts, we are learning more of our Creator. The word art comes from the Latin root arto. This means, quote, the expression or application of human creative skill through various means, expressing imaginative and technical skill, end quote. Plato and Aristotle both had their definitions and ideas of what the arts were and how they could be of use to us. Both did agree that art was a form of mimesis or imitation. Plato, quote, criticized them for failing to depict the eternal ideal realities that he referred to as forms or ideas, end quote. He felt as if the world was a poor copy of what a perfect world would be like. We can agree with this from a Christian perspective. The world after the fall was and is not perfect. Art wasn't only an imitation of things to Aristotle. He believed that the aim of art was to, quote, represent not the outward appearance of things, but their inward significance, end quote. Just as Aristotle thought of art as a form of showing the inward significance by the way of imitation, Christians can also relate to this. The way we strive to imitate our God is the most significant example. For the Christian, the study of pottery is the study of God by means of understanding principles natural in creation and forming. The more we can understand this analogy, the more we can acknowledge God and his role in the creation. And what better way to understand the analogy than to learn how to make pottery? Scripture says, but now, O Lord, you are our Father, we are the clay, and you are our potter. We are all the work of your hand. The more we learn about the arts itself, both in its purpose and the how-to of making it, the more we are able to understand God. This is all to say that imitation is a way to better understand our God and his creation. And when we educate our minds, wills, and senses, we can better understand the greatest artist. As Christians, what should we be striving to do for students? The general goal should be to equip children to understand the truth about life, the world, and their place in it. At Geneva Academy, we are hoping to show the student truth, beauty, and goodness through education. These three, truth, beauty, and goodness, are so much more powerful than we recognize. Each of them relates to the other, and when we put them together, as we do in a Christian education, the outcome will be far greater than that of schools who don't follow these. Not only does a Christian education give the students knowledge and understanding, but it also helps the children to grow their relationship with the Lord. Aristotle believed that education was central. The fulfilled person was the educated person. According to Aristotle, the aim of education was not only the attainment of knowledge, but also the attainment of happiness and goodness in life. Quote, Plato regards education as a means to achieve justice, both individual justice and social justice, end quote. He eventually comes to the conclusion that knowledge is required to be just. From this, it is safe to say that without it, that is education, and specifically the total sum of education which necessitated artistic education, we will lack the necessary tools for living a fulfilling life according to the Greeks and the Christians. If art is definitionally necessary, assuming the axioms of Plato and Aristotle are true, which I hope will be granted for the sake of this argument, what implementation of education should follow? The first and maybe most important purpose of education is that through it, we can recognize and appreciate our God and ourselves through Him. We can also learn of the, quote, process of human development towards God's objective from man, godliness of character and action, end quote. When we educate ourselves, it should be with truth, beauty, and goodness, so that we can learn more of our Creator as He Himself is the way, the truth, and the life. The scripture says, and this is eternal life, that they know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ whom you have sent. Eternal life for the Christian is contingent on intimate, loving, relational knowledge of the Creator. As Christians, we should be striving to educate ourselves and our students so that we can serve the community and be transforming influences in the world for Christ. Another purpose of education is so we can successfully grow as citizens and members of society. This purpose is paramount for the Greeks and significantly important for Christians as they are fulfilling their obligation to be ambassadors for Christ. Education helps us to develop mentally, socially, and spiritually so that we can manage our lives. Without education, our society would quickly crumble. And without a Christian education, the spiritual, chief component of man's existence would be absent, rendering the body just as dead. Now that we have the meanings and utilities of art and education, what is the purpose of a Christian art education? Many people first begin with the question, what purpose is there for art, or why do students need to be taught art if it is only for creativity? These questions have been asked because we have lost the true meaning of art education and what its purpose is. Our education system has focused on making the child's experience the most important part, rather than the importance of what they are learning and why they are learning it. All of this has led to our modern form of education. In public schools, we are currently using the STEM method of education. STEM is used to teach students how to, quote, solve problems, make sense of information, and know how to gather and evaluate evidence to make decisions, end quote. Without the arts and the basic education, it can be difficult to grow these skills. The arts can improve all of the skills that the schools are looking for, but instead of trying to better off the children, they are just trying to better off how the school is scored. Most people see that the arts can be useful at times, but that they are not essential. They are one of the first things to leave the curriculum when a school is trying to stay within their budget. Schools have been telling us that they are trying to educate kids to the best of their ability, but when they continue to remove the arts from their curriculum, they are just showing us that they really don't care. Everything that stays in the curriculum are the subjects that are on the standardized tests. This is another instance where we can see that we have lost the true meaning of education. The study of the arts has lost its value, which has led to them being removed from the schools. The importance of art history is that from it, we can learn to be virtuous citizens, just as Plato had said, and we can also gain eternal life as it connects us to God and helps us to understand Him. When you are studying art history, you are learning about the art from the past and seeing the world from another person's perspective, but there is so much more to it. If you look at it from the Christian perspective, you are able to see that the study of art can lead to a virtuous citizen and eternal life. As Christians, we can look at art from the past and we can learn what was true, good, and beautiful, and what wasn't. Once we have figured out the good and the bad, we are then able to make new art that is pleasing to God and beautiful through His eyes, not the world's. And when we teach ourselves and students to view art history in this way, we have more people who are striving to praise God through their art. According to Plato, music is a useful instrument for education, quote, because more than anything else, rhythm and harmony find their way into the inmost soul and take strongest hold upon it, end quote. Music should be moving the soul towards goodness and truth. For Christians, music is very important since it is used to give God glory and to worship Him. We are supposed to express our joy through singing and dancing to Him. As Christians, we need to realize the importance of the arts in our education. People outside of Christianity can appreciate the arts and respect them, but they won't see their true significance. When you look into the arts from the Christian perspective, you are brought to another level of admiration. If we continue to practice the arts, whether it's music, creating something, or the study of art history, we will be learning more of our Creator. Wherever human culture is found, artistic expression of some form is also found. The paintings on the wall of an ancient cave or a medieval cathedral are all expressions of human creativity given by God, the Creator. Art is important for all people because all people are made in the image of God. The arts are a part of us, a part of God's creation. If we continue to abandon the arts, we aren't only losing academic benefits, we are also losing crucial parts of their relationship with our Creator and our capacity to raise up good citizens. With that being said, we cannot continue to leave the arts out of our education. Everyone must realize their importance, otherwise students will continue to be deprived of all that is true, good, and beautiful. I'll open any questions if you guys can.
I'm just gonna say, I read over both of these and I got tired just reading them. I can imagine how much work you guys did. It's been a few years, I don't know about you, since I became a teacher, so I'll have to go back. When I was in school, we had to do a lot of this around school, and I think that's important. Went to Christian college in Reno, and so, and I do think it's difficult to sometimes take your thoughts and translate them to paper. I went to school on scholarship and I ran cross-country track and wrestled. And my wrestling coach, he was a big guy and he had his PhD in poetry. I found that kind of interesting. Here's this big guy screaming, and he was not what you would think of poetry, but he said, I said, well, why poetry? He says, because to say something in a lot of words is easy, to say things in a few words is hard. That's what I want. This is kind of like what we do here, you know. So I think this is good. I think you guys have done an excellent job. And, it's going to be. I tried to find things wrong, and I had a hard time. So I don't know, but that's my opening. So
So we're doing opening.
yes.
And then do we get to questions?
Yes,
Does that help?
yes,
Okay,
you get to have
so he has
first
set the precedent.
Yes.
So,
I want to kind of make it easy.
want me to look at the rules.
All right.
Yeah, it was great. And I think to listen to it is a lot more pleasing than to read. I mean, I think that's typical with a lot of, it's just easier to read and to get your emotion from it and, you know, how much work you put into it. And I learned a lot. It was very interesting. I'll just kind of give you an overview and then I can ask questions as maybe we can go back. Pardon me? No. I thought that I really liked the information regarding the different periods of art. I thought it was a good way to kind of tie the whole paper together. I would like to have seen a lot more in depth in that area, but I thought the periods that you hit were very important because a lot of us don't know it, we forget it, and we need to know that. A lot of the quotes, the one in here talking about music and how important it is as we get older to play music, to listen to music, really drives home, I think, this entire presentation of, you're right, how important it is from small children to the older adults. So I thought that was really nice how you kind of did some weaving of that through there. I like how you did great work at tying the actual studies on how the brain responds in the musical instruction. That was great. So those were just some highlights. Another statement, I felt like you could have used subtitles in your paragraphs. Some of them you had them, that way I would have known what you were trying to get at or talk about. And once I got into it, I got it, I understood it, but to have those subtitles or side headings would have been helpful on throughout the paper, but I don't know if that's part of the project or not.
I think
That's
so.
just from a person reading, you know, so statement wise, I thought it was just great, and I understand that there's so many schools that, because of finances, it's difficult to get that into the curriculum. I was gonna ask a question though, before I forget. One of my questions was, do you think that you can teach art within the other subjects, school subjects? So instead of having an art class or art music time, can you weave some of those in, like through the STEM program, do you think? Or, you know, any of those core subjects? Is there a way to maybe, have you thought when you prepared this, how could we put those into the curriculum?
I haven't specifically thought about weaving the arts into that, but through, I mean, such as science classes, there's obviously pictures of everything, and that's considered art. And I think you can put in some aspects of the arts into those core classes, the STEM classes, but I don't think you will be able to get the full benefit out of it since you're not solely focusing on the arts in those classes.
So maybe, she brought up a really good point, is that it's one thing to read something, it's something to listen to something. And it's because we're not, you know, communication isn't just reading, it's passive expression and all that stuff. And so I probably would have got more listening to it and reading than had the text to read as well. But since we talked about the STEM, I thought you were very insightful. I don't know if you were prompted in this area or not, but to understand that. We have we have kids, our girls have 2 kids in the public school system in the San Diego area, and the other one's going to a private school. They live in Danville, both in California. And it's interesting, the place that the standardized testing has made such an impact, because especially for the parents who are both dentists, very academic, very wanting their child, they have one child, and wanting him to have the best of everything. He's already, it's assumed he's going to Stanford or maybe Oxford, but that's where he's going. And they chose the schools only by their score, and you bring that out. And it comes down, I think, part of this whole thing, the reality of it, is that these kind of schools, a lot of schools, not particularly this one, your school, but a lot of these schools, of these kids are sent to these high-power schools because they're school. You mentioned that? And I think that's the driving force factor. And I think that has gone a long way in the schools putting funding only toward those. And you make that point very well. I was very surprised that you would be that insightful. I mean, that's high. I just was kind of blown away by that part. The other thing I thought really well too in here was, like, maybe we're not doing this the way we want to, but you came down to talking about the science part of it with the doctor's notes. Anytime you can quantitate, make a premise or a thesis and then quantitate that thesis in some measurable way. In other words, let's say I think or I like or this, but when you can quantitate that with some numbers, that goes a long way in supporting your thesis. And you did that really, really well. And I thought that. The third thing of observation, you started and ended at the same place. You started out by talking about everything comes from the creator. And then you're talking about how you're creative and you throw these aside. On the other side, you're saying everything born comes from the creator, trailing the wisp of glory, which I thought was very inspiring. Very inspiring. And then, a couple of sentences later, and then instead we throw them to the side, like you throw them away, like you discard them, like they're not worth anything. And I think that's really what's gone on here in public education. sad. My college I went to had an incredible music program, and of course it was a private college, but I think that you're right. I think that art education and the actual function, I think God's creation needs to create. That's in part of it. That's our human, He's bringing that to us. So I think that's true. So, anyway, so that's kind of what my oversight is. I can ask one.
You have a question?
I don't know if I have a question. I mean, I'm really having a hard time to say that. I think that I like the brevity of it. I think you didn't have to fool with a lot of stuff you didn't need to do it. I thought that. I think that you had some really good. I like words a lot. So it says like part of it says once the layers. In other words, this formula of thinking connects on this on page 3. This formula of thinking I wrote built together, and it says comes from the dots of mental importance in having an education, especially once layered. In other words, that surprised to me. It's like you're getting a really good paint job, right? In the body shop, you got to layer those paints. You can't throw it all on at once. And I think that's what we're talking about here. And music is a part of that layer.
I have a question. What did you learn from your research that you didn't already know? If one thing stood out to you when you were researching.
Probably the biggest thing was the music and how it physically affects the brain, because I've played the violin since I was 4 or 5, and I've always heard in my house how it's good for you and everything, but I've never actually done the study of how it physically affects your brain. So it was interesting to see how that process of playing an instrument or listening to music can change your brain that much.
Do you see yourself, when you go on to college, trying to impact kids and working with kids to get them interested in music or concerts?
I haven't thought about that specifically, but I'm actually going to Oregon State for a major in interior design, so I'm sticking with that art side of things because that's always been a passion of mine. But I'd like to continue playing my violin as much as I could in college for sure.
So I'm trying to think of questions. I know that's what I'm supposed to, right? And those that know me know I'm not always supposed to, especially when I like to do that. But I think that you made some really great points. I think that questions. Okay, so when you say, again, back to that subject about when you say that removing the art from curriculum, then you say they're just students that they don't really care. Okay, that struck out to me as do you think they don't really care, or do you think out of necessity they have to play the game, score the school, get the money? I mean, that's the reality of it. So I think that says, I'm not so sure if people don't really care. Maybe they don't know enough to care. Or maybe they are just trying to play the game, cards that dealt with it. So I don't know, what's your feeling on that?
Are you asking like?
I have a sister who is, she's 13 years younger, my brother and I, and she's been a school teacher up in the Portland area, elementary school teacher for over 30 years. And she tells me all these horror stories, I'm not getting all that. But I don't know, I think they're put in a tough spot, the teachers. I'm not so sure that them, I think they struggle in feeling that they have the backing of the school system to do the kind of job they need to do. And I think a lot of them who have had art education and other things when during their education have seen the value of it, but they're not able to express that because of the unions and all the other stuff that's going on. I think that's what and I'm saying all that to say that's kind of what you're fighting.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
So what do you think about that? Do they really care? Or they're just in a bad spot or what?
Well, I mentioned a few times in here, like you said, how people think that they can be good for you, but that they're not essential. And I think that's mainly because people don't realize what they hold, like what the arts hold inside of it, and they just see it as something that can make you draw better, or you can be better at painting or filmmaking or something along those lines. But when you actually study the arts in depth, like we do at a classical Christian school, you are able to learn that it's not only helping your creativity, but it's making you a more godly person, and you're imitating Christ, and you're becoming a better person and citizen through it.
Well, I think you went a long way in proving your point.
And that you've played violin for many, many years. I hope that you can, like you said, you continue it, you know, become involved. Like we have the music on the half shell here that we've had for 28 years. And, you know, if you can get involved in some community efforts in Corvallis, that will be fabulous. And I think that's really important. And, you know, art in the school sometimes starts with someone like you that goes in and volunteers their time and sees how important it is, and for kids to see that, because our parents can tell us all the time how important, but for their peers to go in, or, you know, a nice smiling face to go in and maybe do some teaching, I think that, I mean, coming out of this whole thing, I would hope that that's something that you would think of doing and volunteering your time, because it is really important, and they don't have the time or money or, you know, to do that. So I would hope that would be my advice, is that I hope you continue and share that, because it's a lifelong, it's absolutely lifelong. So I thought it was a great paper.
Yeah. I did have one comment, if I might, on talking about the Renaissance, the period coming up, the so-called the rebirth. We've had quite a lot of background and more of a from a scriptural standpoint than art standpoint. But anyway, I don't know if anybody went and seen all the classical. We had a chance to go do quite a bit of traveling, and saw a lot of the Rubens and the big classical paintings of some of the old churches and stuff, and it's inspiring. It really is. It's really inspiring. But part of humanism coming out, it talks about humanism. So I just wanted your comments. It seems to me that now that I'm getting a little bit older, not for a little bit older, it seems to me that generations following me are becoming more and more self-centered and more humanist. In other words, what's good in life is, if it's good for me, it's good. If it's bad for me, it's bad. And so they seem to have that as their yardsticks for measuring good and evil, what they should or should not do. And it talks about that a little bit in here, even back then. And I was wondering about your comments about some of the music you hear today and some behavior you see today. Do you think that think there's a rise of humanism inside the music of today? And do you see that as a positive thing or a negative thing? I know there's more free expression and all that. Do you think humanism is a force in music, and or do you really think that music is expressing humans? So how do you feel about that?
By humanism, you mean like self-centeredness?
Yes.
Okay. What I would say to that is, obviously, a lot of the music that is considered popular today is self-pleasure kind of things, like humanist. And it's not necessarily right from the Christian perspective, because when we're comparing if it's good or bad, we need to compare that to God, because He's our ultimate and true example for everything that we should be figuring out whether it's good or not. But I definitely agree that a lot of the music that we hear today is very self-centered, and it's not honoring God as it should be.
But as Christians, you're going to face a world out there that are non-Christians. In fact, Bible speeches that as a Christian, you can expect the world to be opposite. So you have to be able to give answers to audiences, not necessarily these kind of audiences, but audiences. And you'll get into one of that in school, and especially in the workplace. But I try to be not the most redneck person in the world, I probably am, but it's difficult for me to understand some of what's going on right now. And as I get older, I have a heart, I think I understand less. It seems to me that the humanistic view, whether it's music, whether it's doing their daily task, whether they're showing up for work, not showing up for work, or whatever they're doing, is all about what's good for me, not what's good for others. Whether it's on a job or or in school, or anything else. And I would hope that there would be, music should be soothing and opposite. It should not be something that makes us more inward. It should be something that expresses outward. It seems to me that a lot of music today is going the other way. Because I think there's, music is like anything else, it can be for good or for evil. And I think there's a lot of, and one of the things that I think Hitler's shown up is that, subliminal music, words that are said, I mean, I can't understand half of that music. But I think some of those subliminal messages could be counterproductive, especially when people in their formative years, because I think that really makes the biggest, because as you get older, you get a framework, your character gets developed, and you have some resistance. What do you do when you're younger? So you're more vulnerable, that kind of stuff. So I'm just wondering your thoughts, if you had any, of how do you, as a Christian young woman, and a magician, how are you going to take your skills and what you learn and stop the negative side of music, or any other art for that matter?
What I would say to that is, with everything that I've learned from Geneva and also playing music myself, I would strive from just me, myself, to share that with other people who aren't Christian so that they can learn the benefits and the Christian side of things rather than just the ideas of how music can be pleasurable, even if that's not Christian pleasure. But yeah, I do agree that a lot of the music that we hear today is not good and true to what we should be striving to become. But I would hope that I can share with others the importance and the truth about what good music is.
Do you have any questions about?
I did not prepare any.
Good. I have an answer to you. Well, you did a great job. It's a lot of work. It's obvious, and you were. But I think you have a gift with your music, and you've done well. I think I've actually heard your group a few times. I can't get used to them in our business, but good for you. Good for you. All right. Well,
We're not very tough.
Yeah, it's funny because, when we were going through the preparation process, Dr. Tester, myself, and the others, we were grilling you, like, define your terms. It's like, oh, is it going to be like this? It's horrible. Science.
You have to go through.
It's a mercy. It's a mercy. No, thank
We
you.
want to be asked back, maybe that's it.
No, this is, no, you guys are doing great. Why don't we take a 5-minute break, and then we'll have Heidi Koch and present her capstone. So we'll dismiss and return back at 6:45.
What do you need to?
I'm gonna rip apart your paper later.
No, you can.
Well, what I really like about this work, she does a really wonderful highlights. Some wonderful. Talks about this. Talks about
We're in 7th, 8th grade.
Everybody comes from here to truly this program.
How you doing, Tom? Oh, I didn't do that.
Yeah, that is what music.
Thank you.
The other side is terminated.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Formula thinking. Chief component of bands is this town.
The other thing too is when we were talking about
I
this,
bring my teacher to
I told her you have to everybody wants that, you know, I don't think anybody, even in a public setting, would say it's such a, it's just a true principle of thinking that here is. So,
I was.
And it's hard to compare.
no, it's true. It almost comes down to like the personality of the one teaching.
Well, that's a great thought, because if you're teaching elementary school, I'm not artistic at all, I'm musically inclined, you're not gonna go out. But that's it, so that's the information that's in the maker thing.
There might, yes, there is water.
Nice work.
Just reminded me that I should have told you guys I have my results for our graduation. Mandatory She also wanted me to get a picture of you guys handshakes and now
It's up to them. You can just stand next to each
He's
other.
been with my parents, so.
You can just stand. I'm just.
Where's the best place to stay?
I'm really big on That's not like quite exactly true. All right, can I read something?
Well, no. I mean, like.
I get you. Yeah, that's true. So do you have to do that?
Good to see you. I'm retired now. Living the life, man. Well, yours doesn't quite like it's a little bit different.
It is really hard to listen and
Yeah, I'll call everybody back to see.
I guess I'll go next.
You want to start?
White, go over here, take her. Sister and brother.
He was the one that.
Yeah, so you're probably like a business minor, interior design, fashion, or fashion.
It's just like, I'm not even like arguing with some people that don't kind of like match this.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, why don't we find our way back? Yes, yeah. I've been granted the liberty to give the gentleman liberty, if they want to remove their jackets, they're fine. For the sake of, for the sake of being able to hear, the ladies, we had to turn off the air conditioning. So, it just makes for, a much hotter, more fiery question and answer session. So, we'll just go with whatever happens. Heidi, would you come on up and share your capstone?
Hi, my name is Heidi Duflo, and my capstone is on the role of civil liberties in preserving the health of the country during a pandemic. In early December, Chinese doctor Li Wenliang, a 34-year-old ophthalmologist, noticed 7 cases of a virus that he thought looked like SARS, the virus that led to a global epidemic in 2003. As the cases became more apparent, he sent a message on December 30th to fellow doctors, warning them to wear protective clothing to avoid infection. 4 days later, he was called into the Public Security Bureau, where he was forced to sign a letter admitting that he had breached the law by making false comments that had severely disrupted the social order. Less than a week after signing the documents, Lee described on a Weibo post how on January 10th, he started coughing followed by a fever, and took a one-way trip to the hospital only 2 days later. He was diagnosed with COVID-19 on January 30th. Local authorities later apologized to Dr. Lee, but not in time for him to hear it. Just a week later, on February 7th, the Chinese doctor lost his life to the virus. Hearing of his death, the Chinese people began to cry for freedom of speech. The top 2 trending hashtags on the Weibo website, the Chinese version of Twitter, were hashtag Wuhan government owes Dr. Li Wenliang an apology and we want freedom of speech. Both hashtags were quickly censored and hundreds of thousands of comments were also deleted. Wenliang was one of several whistleblowers in the medical profession who tried to notify the public but were shut down by authorities in the crucial first weeks of the outbreak. In the case of a pandemic, free access to credible information is paramount to the health of a society. If a government doesn't have enough accurate, free information, the only option is to shut down everything until there is enough general knowledge of the situation in order to surgically handle it. If China had exercised free speech, would we be in the current pandemic we find ourselves in today? While it is impossible to say that a single course of action could change the entirety of the circumstance, we can assess what might have improved it. In a time of crisis especially, a single government power cannot conduct a functioning country. While a degree of central planning is critical to regulating the distribution of resources efficiently under these particular circumstances, it does not have the capacity to totally address the issue effectively apart from public support and an educated populace. The more we allow a government whose intentions are not personalized to the needs of an individual dictate the way we speak, think, or act, the closer we are to losing our natural rights and becoming a country where no one can truly feel safe. Harry Truman said, "Once a government is committed to the principle of silencing the voice of opposition, it has only one way to go, and that is down the path of increasingly repressive measures until it becomes a source of terror to all its citizens and creates a country where everyone lives in fear." The suppression of speech hinders an understanding of the crisis and how to prevent its recurrence, diminishes the effort to hold accountable the officials who are responsible for managing the threat, prevents the containment of the pandemic, and poses a lasting risk to civic health. If a central government takes power, silencing the public in order to prevent social disruption, they will only be removing the ability for citizens to do what is best for their personal situation and restricting natural human liberties. So today I would like to share my research about how various forms of government have handled the pandemic and hopefully shed light on how we as a country can learn. I will lay out for you a brief summary of how China, South Korea, and the United States have handled the pandemic and show that the more transparent governments are the ones who have handled it best. Time does not permit me to show you these patterns in the UK, New Zealand, Iran, as well as Japan. Looking at the ways in which other countries function and their background with past pandemics, democratic societies do appear to be more effective than authoritarian cultures in dealing with major threats that include disease epidemics, specifically in light of how they secure and encourage civil liberties and civil rights. However, it is impossible to say that one particular form of government has it all right because of the interconnecting systems such as economics, education, cultural values, geographic location, historical prejudices, and the like that would render a more pointed judgment. It is the transparent government which works best, regardless if they are democratic, parliamentary, totalitarian, etc. Totalitarian tendencies hush the voice of opposition to social order and in turn contributed to the pandemic that has taken the lives of 350,000 people worldwide as of yesterday, caused a lockdown of over 50 countries and a quarantine of 90% of the United States citizens, not to say anything of the rest of the world. The statistics change every day in their number, but to say something of the matter, a huge portion of the world has been affected by COVID-19, either by illness, death, quarantine, or economic costs. If China continues to suppress bad news as a part of the communist regime's efforts to control information, they will deserve much of the blame for the worldwide effect. The virus risks displaying government incompetence and dishonesty, and thus incentivizes the regime to cover up the scale of the crisis. With its people and media silenced, there is no counterweight to hold the Chinese communist system accountable for its absence of information. Combating a pandemic requires the opposite, and the Chinese communist system may have made the coronavirus a far greater tragedy than it should have been. Seton Hall University's Yang Song Huang concluded that China's major problem in handling the 2003 SARS epidemic resulted from the government's failed effort to remove panic by withholding information about the disease from the public. Quote, "A fatal period of hesitation regarding information sharing and action spawned anxiety, panic, rumor mongering across the country and undermined the government's efforts to create a milder image of itself in the international arena," end quote. The absence of civil liberties and free information enabled the Chinese government to continue its practice of suppressing information considered harmful to its regime. As the great dystopian author George Orwell once said, "The most effective way to destroy people is to deny and obliterate their own understanding of their history." China concealed information about basic public health issues and, in doing so, perverted its own people's knowledge and ability to react well to the new crisis. As has been quoted, those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it. And while we can blame China for its mishandling of the early days of the virus, it would be unjust to attribute the current worldwide results solely to that country. Each country, under its own principles of governance and its own set of cultural values, has attacked this crisis as saw fit. However, some did better than others. The first point of this paper highlights the contrast between Western democracy as an example of encouraging free speech and transparency, and China's totalitarianism, insofar as it censors and hinders these principles. However, the details of contrasting like-minded democracies, South Korea and the United States, grants us insight as to how similar forms of government have responded differently based on how they preserve free speech and civil liberties. It is not just important that these principles of free speech are protected and encouraged across the globe, but that we also learn the practical methods to handle such a situation in the light of those liberties that we cherish. Contrasting the attitudes and responses of two countries with similar government systems grants us valuable insight into the nature of their responses, given that they share a similar constitution and communal values. The central point of my paper highlights the importance of free speech with dealing with a crisis. And what better example of a country with free speech than the United States? While my thesis would suggest that such a government would come out on top while dealing with the current situation we find ourselves in today, my research has suggested otherwise. Consider the fact that the United States and South Korea each confirmed their first coronavirus case within a day of each other in late January. But South Korea raced far ahead of the United States in testing, total and per capita, its population for COVID-19, and was able to contain the spread because of the power of this information, while we sat back and did nothing for at least 2 months. Though these countries both have a democratic republic government system, their statistics have shown an incredible difference in death and infection rate. So what distinguishes these two countries? First, South Korea has so far been very successful and organized in its testing, due to the fact that its system is the most expensive and well-organized in the world. And also with its extensive efforts to contact trace and isolate those who are infected or have been in contact with the virus. The numbers and statistics that we can attain from testing and contact tracing, along with government transparency and access to this knowledge, allows for more personal and economic freedom. As of March 17th, South Korea tested more than 270,000 people, which amounts to more than 5,200 tests per million inhabitants. Whereas data from the U.S. Centers for Disease Control show that the United States has so far carried out only 74 tests per 1 million inhabitants, which is also due to the lack of facilities to produce tests and an unwillingness to involve the private sector from the beginning. Though there is limited access to testing, we have to do our best to test everyone possible in a wide variety of age groups, cities, and even the healthy. The more information we have on spread rate, death rate, ages infected, etc., the easier it is for people to make calculated decisions on what they as individuals should do to slow the spread. Another thing that South Korea implemented from the very start was contact tracing. Contact tracing is essential to alert individuals of their personal security and allows the individual to be responsible for their own action. Since the MERS incident, South Korean legislation gave the government authority to collect mobile phone, credit card, and other data from those who test positive to reconstruct their recent whereabouts. That information, stripped of personal identifiers, is shared on social media apps that allow others to determine whether they may have crossed paths with an infected person. This system only takes 10 minutes to analyze the movements of the infected individuals, and for those who come in contact with an infected person, the app informs the local public health center near the infected citizen's residence, and they are quickly notified. If they test positive, they are hospitalized at COVID-19 special facilities, and those without symptoms are asked to remain self-quarantined for 14 days. As of now, Google and Apple are both working to create such an app. This model of information exchange shows that the private sector is also trying to distribute robust, anonymous, transparent information. Two democratic republic countries can be constitutionally the same, but it is up to the people and the leaders of the country to handle the situation with grace and wisdom. As we can see in the case of South Korea and the US, their forms of government are very similar. However, as of yesterday, the United States has had 1.7 million cases and 100,000 deaths, whereas South Korea has had 11,000 cases and 270 deaths. South Korea quickly enacted testing, tracing, and the use of PPE, While America did not take the virus to be as serious and therefore has caused an astronomical amount of cases compared to South Korea. Those numbers, of course, are determined by many other factors such as the size of the country, cultural norms, and financial incentives associated with testing results. In summary, the information given to the public by means demonstrated in South Korea plays a huge role in their low death and infection rate. While we can fight over strategy and responses, none of this would even be possible if it wasn't for the civil liberties that supported our people. It's these defining liberties that separate could have been better in these areas from censored for public safety. And there's no question which is better. As Pragaya Tiwari said in her article about censoring information, quote, historically pandemics, wars, and famines have led to the expansion of the powers of the state at the expense of democratic rights and freedoms. These freedoms, once lost, are not easily regained. And when it comes to downgrading democracy, the right to free speech tends to be the proverbial canary in a coal mine. In a pandemic, if we allow our government to expand their powers to secure our health with no intent of returning our liberties, we are really just allowing them to downgrade our republic and create a culture where our knowledge is so limited that we cannot even make choices for our own well-being. If we as a country fail to observe the destruction past plagues have caused in the world of lives, livelihood, and culture, we are doomed to make uneducated guesses on how best to handle such a crisis. And in our own misery, we are sure to repeat those failures. Our First Amendment rights are made whole when our country protects the citizen and arms them with as much knowledge as possible. Knowledge of events comes from massive widespread testing, which gives information on targeted age groups, spread methods, and allows those with non-symptomatic conditions to quarantine as to mitigate the spread. Testing the mass protects those who are sick and allows those who are not to continue living normally with certain precautions, which in the long term is healthier for the stability of an economy. Along with this, accurate information is necessary for citizens to feel safe. It is much better for a country to accurately depict the case and fatality numbers so that we have access to reliable information of the repercussions. For those who are afraid or need them, such as doctors or nurses, personal protective gear is also essential to help prevent the spread of the virus. Governments need to be ready with the right gear to protect their citizens and ensure that healthcare workers are kept in good shape. Lastly, the use of contact tracing is key to better overall information of who had the virus and who should stay home. This method, which may seem to remove some of the personal privacy of the people, actually works as a method to allow each citizen the right to do what is best for their personal needs. If they see that they have been in contact with someone carrying the virus, they can quarantine. If not, they can feel free to go about their lives and continue to sustain the economy. This goes hand in hand with the other precautions of testing and PPE, because together they produce information for the populace and allow them to practice their civil liberties and do what is right. In its attempts to silence information, China not only kick-started the world-consuming pandemic, but left its citizens defenseless with limited knowledge of the situation. In the case of totalitarian countries such as China as well as Iran, transparency was obliterated, and case numbers go to show that in a place with limited knowledge and punishment for speech, it is difficult for people to know how to handle it on their own. When people are taxed their personal freedoms without being represented, well, in the case of the United States, for example, we can see that ends up in a revolution. China silenced the whistleblower doctor, which resulted not only in his death, but the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people. The United States, though it values the meaning of civil liberties in its constitution, failed to quickly take action, which has caused serious consequences for health, well-being, and economy of our country. The future will only regard it as a total loss if we fail to learn from it. And to learn from the brothers of the democratic tradition, South Korea, New Zealand, and Japan, which practice these essential precautions while giving open access to the information found, and their case and death numbers have shown the results. Li Wenliang, the Chinese doctor, lost his life while trying to warn others of the coming virus, but not in vain. His death was a wake-up call to the Chinese for a need for free speech, and in the months to come would prove that free access to information would ensure the safety and stability of a country. We are not helpless to the infectious diseases that come our way. No, we are helpless only when our human rights to freedom are denied. China was our wake-up call. South Korea showed us how best to handle a pandemic. It is up to us as a country to hold fast our constitutional rights and to fight for liberty on the battlefield of a pandemic. God help us. Okay. Actually, I might need that. I'll leave it open questions for you guys.
You wanna start?
Go ahead.
I'm all about overview. That's kind of my right.
Right.
So just like Caitlin's presentation, she started and ended at the same place, which I thought was really good. And I think that's a good, I don't know if you guys are taught that, but if you are taught that, you need to plug the teachers. What it does is come back to your original statement, and this is personal because of the individual's name, which I think made it even stronger. It also tends to ties everything else together structurally, which means this is where I start, and this is where I end. I do like the ending. I think it has a lot of passion in it. It's a strong conclusion and to a very emotional topic today affecting everybody, which is obviously what we have. I have several questions regarding you.
Great.
Unfortunately, you wrote a lot more, and guess what? That always exposes you to more questions.
Yes.
It's the good and the bad of it. So that's kind
Keep
of
going.
my.
Oh, well, I can.
Don't you want to give it over to me or not? You're not about it.
I was thinking of a word that I need right now. It's not coming to me. Again, I thought it was great, and it's really interesting because it's so current. And it's going to be interesting to read this 6 months from now and see the changes. I guess one of the questions I had is, in your research, did you agree, when you look through all the sightings and all the research you did you agree with a lot of the findings that the researchers cited? Or were you did you feel like you were kind of trying to contradict and find different articles? That's not a very good way of saying it. But I guess what I'm saying is, with all the information that we know, and there's still a lot that we don't, when you read through the research articles, how much of it did you go, yeah, this isn't true, this isn't right, and I get that. That's when you read those research articles, you don't know right from wrong, true from false, but I think there'd be a lot to read through and a lot to figure out what you want to put in paper. So I guess my question is, how'd you narrow it down?
So actually just Google searching, if you search how did South Korea handle the pandemic versus how did China handle the pandemic, you can see that people from China, the Chinese people are crying for free speech, as I mentioned in my capstone. And I think it's just a natural human tendency to want to be free. And so finding things that agreed with my capstone was actually way easier than I thought it would be, because people have picked up on this and they are saying, wow, like China could have handled this better if they had just given us access to information and not silence the whistleblower doctors in the beginning.
Right.
So back to your question, it was way easier than I thought it would be to find information that completely agreed with me, because this is a wake-up call to our need for civil liberties.
Because they talk about masks versus no masks,
Yep.
testing versus no testing, antibodies versus no antibody testing, vaccine versus 6 months, 4 years.
Mhm.
I mean, there's just you did a really great job of condensing it and getting to the point, because you could have been all over on this paper because there's so many unknowns.
Yeah.
So I commend you for that. I thought that was just a great job of being concise and forthright. And like I said, 6 months from now, it's going to be real interesting to read this to figure out how it has changed. That's a comment.
Okay. I don't have to.
So good.
I want to go back to China a little bit. I want to talk about, and I learned something here, which is kind of almost analogous to the school situation. Well, the STEM tests, okay? The school has to, in the real world out there, a school needs to compete on a high level. Basically, they need to produce kids that turn out great test scores. Well, the good news, I guess, the test scores are going away. That's the good news, right? But the second thing, and so here on page 8, it talks about a social credit score. Wow.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about that?
So the social credit score wasn't the particular focus of my paper. It was more of a side comment as to how
Right.
the Chinese government deals with their citizens. It's not a relationship. It's nothing like that. It's all a score really, and they're completely watched. There's no privacy in their culture, and so in a culture like that where you're completely watched, and it reminds me of the whole Big Brother situation. And in that culture, you can't escape being scored on something. People are constantly watching you. So it wasn't a primary focus. So I don't have all.
Well,
the
I think
information,
it's
but-
important because it's the way they control their citizens. The citizen has to behave in a certain way,
Yeah.
and they get their social, economic status behave in a certain way. Almost reminds me of Nazi Germany, where when Hitler was coming to power, he had the children trained as all these little soldiers, and one of the way you got to the top was to spy on your parents. And you got a lot of points to be turned your parents in, and they wanted to get you. That really puts you up there. So I'm not trying to say that's what this is. What I'm saying, it's interesting that the social credit score, basically, actually, they're scared to death about doing something. And after you do it for a certain length, you just have to do it. So that's one.
And I think a big concern that we can have, and it is that if China continues to go in the ways that they are, they could turn into something like that. Because as I mentioned in my capstone, you have to remove the history in a culture like that because you don't want people to know the history, because history repeats itself over and over again, as we can see.
Great book, China's Vision of History. China's Vision of Victory. It's out. It's out. I'll get you the name call and all that. I'm currently reading it, so.
That's great.
Yeah. So that was a very interesting thing. So I had no idea they had this social score. Well, we have when you apply for homes or a house, they will do that. Credit score. I don't buy anything on credit
A little
score,
different.
but yeah.
I liked you had a lot of good quotes.
Mhm.
I wish I would have highlighted them, but I really enjoyed it. Kind of went back and reread. You did a really good job putting quotes in where they needed to be. When you were doing your research, did you find any information on to quarantine the sick and then let the healthy go to work? Because we've never really quarantined the entire United States, ever. So whether you're healthy or not. So did you come across any research on quarantining the people who were sick and letting the rest go on to work?
I didn't find much research on that actually, but I mean, we kind of do that now we've kept essential businesses open, and so in a sense, we've kind of done that now, but I think maybe what you're trying to get at, and please tell me if I'm wrong, and I kind of addressed that, is that certain age groups that are affected
Right.
do want to quarantine more than others. So for me, I know that the statistics are way, 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 way lower of getting infected or dying from the virus, whereas my grandpa could definitely get it and die from it like much easier. So I think that it does have something to do with that, and it's hard to know really because we don't have all the information, which is too bad. And it would be great if we could. I tried to point out this season.
No, that was good. You did a good job.
So you mentioned natural rights and some of the breeds, and right now, within as the country starts to reopen right now, that's being the hot topic. Okay, in other words, as a gym owner that says I have a right to run a business, to feed my family, that sort of thing, and that's becoming more and more. I know we were just over in Sun River actually. We drove over this morning, and you just saw that Hannibal Town and the resort is opening up as of Friday, right?
Yeah.
But the way you go to a restaurant, you don't go into a restaurant, you stand and do the thing, and you eat outside and do that kind of thing. So behavior has been changed all over, but when is, you're talking about natural rights or civil liberties given up, and on the other hand, how do we mute those civil liberties, not natural rights, but civil liberties enough to come up? I mean, when is that okay, and how long is that okay? That's the question of the day. So do you believe that what's going on right now between the tug of war, what would you say to a business owner that's had their restaurant closed, and there's several around here who have, and saying, okay, you cannot open, or you have to open? What would you say to that person?
I'm trying to, would you mind just rephrasing that?
What would you say? What would you say if someone said to you, "Is this right? Is it right that the government can limit me to close my business or limit my business?" What would you say?
Well, to a certain degree, I would say that it is right, because our government is put in place to protect our citizens, whether that's with our civil liberties or our physical health. And in this case of this pandemic, when it came out, nobody really knew anything about it. And before we had all the testing and information that we do today, it was almost impossible to say whether or not we should quarantine and I mean, we did that, but without the knowledge that we had in the beginning, it was necessary to do that, I think. And to some degree, I think the government should be able to step in and say, no, you should close now, because you really don't know the severity of a pandemic or a virus until you've done enough testing and whatnot to be able to say, oh, okay, well, this affects you and this affects you, so we can keep this business open or whatever. So yes, but also it has to dial back, I think, when you do have the information necessary. So I hope did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think that's the kind of real world questions people are asking for right now. I mean, and I think, so do you think that, looking back on what you also understand that South Korea had MERS virus, and you say in your paper that they learned a lot of lessons from MERS. Evidently, we didn't learn much lessons from the epidemic we had with
H3N2.
And I don't understand. It doesn't seem like our government did much of anything. So just summarize real quickly, if you would, say, okay, what do you like about the paper left me thinking that, wow, South Korea really did a really cool job, and we did. Okay, so what are you happy about? Okay, I'm happy about, and you mentioned this on, I think, page 31 or 33 or something like that, is that we can debate these issues, but our government is open, is going to keep us around. In other words, they're not out to get us, so to speak. I don't know exactly. But anyway, what are you happy and what you're not happy about the way our government is now? It's not South Korea, because I don't live in South Korea. How do you feel about it?
I think it's good that our government has taken action, but I wish that we would have taken action sooner. And it hurts to see that in the case of South Korea, they had an epidemic before, but we did too, and we didn't learn from it, whereas they did. But the good things that the United States has done, I think, is just to quarantine, to test as many people as they can. And we don't have all of the testing facilities that South Korea does. But I think we've done our best in the tight situation that we've gotten ourselves into. However, I think that we could have done better if we had started sooner, and we wouldn't be in the tight situation we are in today.
I have a similar question. How well has the U.S. done in saving civil liberties? State by state, or, Oregon versus the president, and how those overlap, and so your thoughts on that?
I think we've done okay. I just think we could have done better. And I wanted to point that out in my paper, is that the United States really did not do the best job. And it's impossible for me as a 17-year-old high school student to say, okay, the United States did this perfectly or whatever, because I just don't have that information. And that just goes to prove my point even further, that the information is necessary to show what you're asking for. How did one state do better than the other, or how did our country really, really do well? And I think the more knowledge that they give, and they've done a pretty good job of doing that, I think it just goes to show that like we're trying to preserve those liberties. But yeah, I definitely just stick with the point that we could have just done better.
Do you have any?
I would just like to comment that the MERS epidemic was 5 years ago.
Yeah.
South Korea, and the one we have
1968 to 1970.
20 years ago. It's a little bit different there. So I think that's why we got caught flat-footed. How about the not the War Powers Act, but the War Powers Act, but the other one about, I can't find it here, about enlisting private enterprise?
Yeah.
Your comments on that. How do you feel? Did you feel that worked? Did you feel that it worked as well? Obviously, it worked in World War II, and so we are a capital-based society. So capital companies were brought in to make these. How effective do you think that was?
We didn't really do a lot of that here, but I think it is really effective. And actually, in some of my research that I didn't even have space for in my formal capstone, I did research on this outside, and there are some businesses on the East Coast that have been stepping into that role and making masks and personal protective equipment. So I think that that's great, but it would have been awesome to see more of that. And because it really was effective in World War II, and even in this case, which is not really publicized, but they were able to make, I think, around 14,000 masks a day. So it is effective, and I think the results can show that. So hopefully in the future we can use that.
The executive branch of the government is the primary duty there is to protect the citizens. And so the executive branch has the War Powers Act. Do you think that the President of the United States should invoke the War Powers Act to declare, he calls this a war, and he uses that, does he have the power to declare war and use the War Powers Act? Do you think, if you could, do you think that would be?
I mean, I think that would have been great. I'm trying to find the quote. I did have a quote from Trump's tweet, which actually, I believe, enacted some of that. But there was very limited information as to how the results of that played out. And I didn't get a clear picture of how that worked. But I do think that a president stepping in and saying, hey, let's let the private sectors also help the big companies to be able to produce this protection and this equipment that we really need, especially for doctors and nurses who go 12-hour shifts with wearing the same mask when they should be changing every patient. So I think that is necessary for the health of the country, for a president to be able to step in and say, hey, we need this.
And they retool, I mean, like General Motors.
No, I
they did
was
some
impressed.
retooling
Personally, I was
and
impressed.
others, and
Yeah.
So is that part of it?
Yeah. In your summary, you talk about power grab. I'm trying to build it. And in Congress, they're doing all these big bills, but they're also taking these bills to provide relief and support, but yet they're adding all these other things in. Museums, and all kinds of stuff. It's kind of one of the things I've been disappointed with our country is instead of the old days, you pass an act and this is for these specific reasons, and all of a sudden we have this 6,000 pages long. And I think what you're seeing is potential for a power grab. Can you make that in here? Expand on that a little bit?
Well, there was a politician recently who said, don't ever let a pandemic go to waste. So I think that a pandemic like this is really easy for people to just try to step into power. And is that what you're asking about?
Quote was, don't let a good crisis.
Yeah.
And that was President Obama's chief of staff, because the mayor of Chicago.
Yeah, but it definitely, a crisis especially leaves room for people to step in and say, let me lead this, and as we can see in past and history, a lot of times that results in an authoritarian country or a tyranny, and it's so dangerous. And I think in a time of crisis especially, it's important for the government to be united and to be open so that those potential threats don't come and infiltrate what we already have.
I thought you did a really good job of contrasting the Western democracy and totalitarianism. I haven't said that word for a long time. I thought you did a great job on that. I had a question on, well, just basic, what you learned from the research that you were just bored by, you had no idea.
A lot of things, but I think one of the things that really stood out was the difference between how New York City and Tokyo have handled the pandemic and our case numbers and results from that. It's absolutely insane. I don't know if you remember reading that in my capstone, but basically New York City and Tokyo have about the same population density with, very, very similar attributes. However, Tokyo has had 256 deaths, where New York has had about 15,000. I can't remember the exact numbers. And there was a man who, I read his article, he actually calculated it out and used population density and all the jazz. And he actually found that New York City had 353 times more case or death count. New York City had 353 more times the number of deaths that Tokyo had. So in that, it was interesting to see that it may not just be as simple as we think. Like, numbers can be messed with, and that may be a huge part of why it appears that we have 100,000 deaths, whereas South Korea only has 270. So that was a huge factor of my capstone. That was just an eye-opening thing. It's like, are we really counting deaths the same?
No, that's, I think one of the great sentences on page 31 that talks about these questions are for future debate, right? But the thesis remains: we'd rather have a country make these things than one that silence as well.
Yeah.
There we go.
That's a good point.
Good job.
Yeah, great
Good
job.
job. Yeah.
Thank you.
Good job.
Well, thank you again, everyone, for coming, and thank you in particular our judges for taking the hours and the energy of going through those. I really appreciate it. Let's give them a round of applause. Likewise, ladies, it's over. All right, I'm going to go ahead and dismiss us, and feel free to not congregate closer than 6 feet. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Those are yours, yes.
Oh, David, you shut this down.
I don't know where did that go.
I have no idea.
I think everything's gone.
Did it reset? Did it reboot?
It looks like it. I did.
Right in the middle of what we were doing.
It might have.
Was it in Safari?
No, it was Chrome.
Hi.
Picture my
Are you sure you want to end your stream? Yes.